This week our parashah is HaAzinu, to give ear. It can be found in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 1, all the way to the last verse, 52. This is the second before the last parashah of the Torah. Soon we'll be celebrating the Simchas Torah, and we're looking forward to doing that. Haftarah this week is 2 Samuel chapter 22, verses 1 through 51. And our Brit Hadashah portion comes out of the book of Romans, chapter 10, verse 17, going to chapter 11, verse 12. Then we pick it up again in chapter 12, verse 19. And then once again we pick up in chapter 15, verses 9 through 10. Our parashah is entitled HaAzinu, which means to give ear. And we don't think about our ears as being important to us, but they are. You know, deaf people have the hardest time adjusting to things than anyone. We can be blind and still get around and still understand where we are and perceive things because our hearing compensates for a lot of what we lack in sight. We can hear when things may be approaching. We can know the direction someone is speaking from. Hearing has a lot of things in it that we take for granted. Yes, if we were deaf, we could still see everything around us. But unless we understood how language is formed and stuff, we would have no clue of what someone was saying to us. We could not hear if there was something approaching us that could cause us harm, or anything like that. So our ears are important to us, and this is one of the reasons why they're part of our bodies that God created. But in this parashah, the importance is understanding to use our ears, to listen. Just like a blind person uses his hearing to know whether or not it's safe to cross the street, open a door, or to move in a certain direction. The ears tell them. It's not just the cane, it's the ears. And like Moses was giving the Israelites, who are spiritually blind still at this time, he's given them that instruction that they could hear, so they would know the way in which to go as they get ready to cross over the Jordan and to take the land of promise. And in this prophetic song, where he has gone from the beginning of the inception of the Israelites to the covenant they've made with God, till his grace and mercy with them in the wilderness, he goes beyond that. He even gives them what's going to happen in the future. How they will turn away from God. How they will look towards other things. But yet God will always be that constant that they can turn to. Why? Because he is what's known in Hebrew as the bat kol, or the small voice. You have to listen. You have to have ears in order to hear. And Moses is saying, use your ears to hear that which you need in order that you can grow, not just in the physical as a nation, but as a people under God, a holy people, a people who are to be the example to all the world of the truth and the grace and the mercy that is our God. This is important why it says to give ear. He could have used the term ristah, which means to listen, but it doesn't. He uses the term azinu. Azinu is unique to naming the ear. So give your ear. Use it. Even in the Haftarah portion of 2 Samuel, is it not where David proclaims, listen, hear what I have to declare about the Lord who is my rock, who is my fortress, who is my shelter, who is my salvation, and all the things that God has done for him. How God has never failed to hear his call. God has never failed to come to him in his time of need. A God who, when others hear of him or hear his name, they fear, they tremble. Yes, so much so, just to come before the King of Israel brings fear and trepidation. Does this not hearken back to the scripture that tells us that every knee and every mouth will confess that he is Lord, because he is the King of Israel? The power in that. There's power in hearing the name. Hearing that name, God. What can it do? Paul even puts the question to the Gentiles of the Roman church. Is it because the Israelites failed to hear, to use their ears and listen, that you have gained riches untold, the salvation of the Lord, that was denied to you all this time because you would not recognize him? But yet now you have been given the blessing of hearing the word of God by the righteous remnant of Israel, who has gained you salvation. Not just you. Paul uses the term, who has brought salvation to the world. That's not just humanity. That's the entirety of the earth. Our earth is in a fallen state. People wonder why we have all these problems with the ecology and with society and within nature and space and all. But you think about it. When the earth fell from grace because of the act of man, the perfectness of it was marred. We have a dim reflection of what was originally of the earth. So therefore, with the coming of Messiah, with the coming of the restoration of all things, and I mean all things, that means of the earth as well as humanity, back to God, we have become enriched again. We have become in the fullness of who we are. And what was made? Therefore, listen. Do not think yourself. In other words, don't tell yourself that you are better than someone else because you have gained something you think someone else has lost. Has God forgot his own? No, God forbid. Paul clearly states that if their lack of hearing brought you riches because you listen, what will happen when their ears open up and they give it to God and receive the testimony of the Messiah, but life from the dead, the resurrection, the second coming, the fullness of all things? This is the point in God's message in HaAzinu. Listen. Quit looking with your eyes and listen with your spirits. Listen with that which will truly give you understanding and insight. When we do that, we can succeed in crossing over. Think about it. Moses gives the Israelites in his song, they call it the Song of Moses because Moses begins from the beginning and goes all the way almost to the end of Israel's history. He tells him his story. Listen and let it guide you. And the times when things look like they're lost forever, remember the story you heard. Remember the song I sang. It will tell you the secret to salvation. Doesn't the Shema tell us to teach these things carefully to our children? When we lie down, when we get up, when we walk about. Why? So that when we get into situations where it seems like all hope is lost because of what we see, we can listen. We can give ear to the voice of God that says, trust me. I will bring you through. I will save you, and you will always be with me. This is his promise. This is the song that David sung. Even Moses was singing it. Moses, who was told to go up on Mount Nebo and look out around. For the last time you will ever see, at least see the land that I promised you. Because he wasn't allowed to enter it. Why? Because he stole glory from God one time. And it cost him. But it didn't steal his salvation. Because God says, I promise you will be gathered to your fathers. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And as Yeshua tells us, when God says he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he is not the God of the dead, the God of the living. Moses was being told, I will gather you into that life that you have been looking for. The life that is always with me. It's a better promised land than what you've seen. Look at the blessing that the people will receive, but understand that you haven't lost the true blessing, and that's the blessing of being gathered to me and to your fathers. Is that worth not more than what you have seen from the top of the mountain? David exhorts us. David screams about it. I will sing your praises upon my throne. Why? Because if it wasn't for God, if it wasn't his trust and listening to what God has spoken to him, he wouldn't be there. He followed his plan. In the same respect, God's ear is not too dull that he cannot hear. Why? David says, I cried unto the Lord, and he heard me. He delivered me. He destroyed my enemies. He made my path straight before me, and he placed me upon his throne. Ears are important. We don't think about it. We put holes in them. Maybe that's how come we can't hear what we keep listening for. It falls through the hole. So, my word for the week is to listen. We've just come through what's known as the 10 days of awe and Yom Kippur, when we went through a period of reflection. But as we have reflected upon our lives and where we lacked and where we needed improvement before the Lord, did not the Lord speak to us about the things that we need to do? And this is why this portion is perfect to follow such a time, because it says to give ear, to listen. Don't just hear it and let it run through the other ear. Put it in between there. Give ear to it. Let it run around in there. Let it work and drop down into your heart. Let it meditate there to where you will grow in God and not shrink. This is Paul's teaching in the book of Romans. The Gentiles thought themselves better than the Jewish believers. But Paul reminds them, God is not short of his promise. And if it weren't for them, you wouldn't have it. You are no better than they are. Put that in your ears and think about it. It reminds us, God does not pick favorites. We're all his favorites. Why? Because we're all his creation. He loves us all equally. He gave the same price for each one of us equally in order that we can have reconciliation to him. Therefore, when we hear his word, it should always be received with joy, so that we will give ear to it, listen to it. And then what follows that, just like it follows in the Torah, vazot habarakah, and then the blessing. And from what we have heard, what we have put in our ears, we will receive as a blessing. And we will not see darkness, but we will see light, and what our circumstances are and what's coming. I used a metaphor earlier today about the shadow of death. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death in Psalm 23. It's that perspective David had. I can see the darkness on one side of me that could take my life from me, but I can see the light of God's fruitfulness and blessing on the other side. And as I walk down the road of life and I look at both sides, I will always have courage and always have boldness. Why? Because he's with me. I've heard his word. I have given ear to it. His promise is that I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever and ever. Why should I fear him? So let us give ear to what God has said. Let us give ear to the good news of the Messiah. Let us give ear to the fact that he is with us as we begin to celebrate Sukkot. God is with us in the form of Mashiach. He has come and he is dwelling with us now. We don't have to wait for the day when he will return physically, because he dwells with us now within ourselves. Therefore, we should give ear and listen.